may know me. I'm a huge advocate for veterans and their rights.
Post-traumatic stress and brain injury go hand in hand. They are not just psychological, but can involve real physical changes in the brain. When we began looking at the physical side of recovery, we discovered newer approaches, like ketones and medical cannabis, that support the body's endocannabinoid system and allow for better systems balance.
I love you too, sweetheart. Yeah. I love you.
Treatments like hyperbaric oxygen therapy help support neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. The changes in function are incredible.
Good morning, mate. Good to see you. Good to see you.
From bedbound daily seizures and polypharmacy to running around with his kid in a park. All right, good evening everyone, and thank you for joining us. Some housekeeping before we begin. We'll have time for questions at the end, so if you have any, please place them into the chat and we'll go through them after the main presentation. Tonight's session will also be recorded, so if you miss anything, you'll be able to access that after it's published online. So it is with great privilege to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Nick Bradley is someone who's not only working at the clinical front line, but also helping shape the future of treatment for veterans in Australia. Nick is the owner-operator of Hyperbaric O2 on the Gold Coast, where he works directly with patients every day. Alongside this, he's undertaking a significant PhD at Bond University, focused on the application of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for Australian veterans diagnosed with PTSD. This is no small undertaking, as it sits right at the intersection of cutting-edge clinical care, research, and real-world impact. Nick brings a strong foundation to this work. He holds a Bachelor of Clinical Sciences and a Master's in Osteopathic Medicine. He has completed international training with the ATMO, the Advanced Training in Medical Oxygen Hyperbaric Medicine team, is a functional medicine hyperbaric clinician through IBUM, the International Board of Undersea Medicine, and is a published author in these fields. Today, Nick will take us through his research into hyperbaric oxygen therapy, including how it works, what the trials are promising, and what this could mean to veterans living with PTSD. Dr. Nick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason. And no, thanks so much for hosting me, Jason and Jackie, and all the inspirational work that you guys do. No. So yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm gonna give a presentation on initially an overview of hyperbaric, what it is, and its application in the world of PTSD, particularly for veterans. And then I'm going to go through an upcoming clinical trial that I'll be hosting or running later on in the year, and be going over the ins and outs of that. And then we'll be taking questions at the end. So yes, no, thank you. I'm up here on the Gold Coast and yeah, doing a PhD through Bond University. And I guess we'll start off from here. So as we all know, PTSD in Australian veterans is a major thing, and this was highlighted in the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, which was published in 2024. And they highlighted the veteran mental health crisis and that it needs reevaluation for the management of mental health. And it also highlighted the over-reliance on pharmaceuticals. And it's known within the PTSD realms that when PTSD becomes chronic, which is long-term, 50% of the patients become treatment resistant, which absolutely highlights the need to investigate new and emerging therapeutic modalities, and of which hyperbaric hopefully is one of those. And obviously, you know, the world's moved on since 2024, and where we've got a lot of very current world events happening where, you know, the world of PTSD and veterans could be even more of an issue in the future. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is basically when one undergoes a treatment where there's the combination of being inside a pressurized vessel, like the one behind me, whilst breathing either enhanced or 100% medical grade oxygen. And I guess a quick overview during a session is when one comes in for a session, there's 3 stages to a session. The first stage, there's a pressurization phase where the person is equalizing the ears with the change of pressure as there's an increase of pressure like diving underneath the ocean. And so they're equalizing the ears through Valsalva or the other techniques until they arrive at the target pressure. And then they'll do 1 hour at pressure, breathing oxygen, and then, or even up to 90 minutes or 2 hours, and then a decompression phase at the end. So that's an overview of a typical session. And this can be done in a few different types of chambers. And you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, there's the top one is what we call a monoplace chamber. This is when mono meaning one, it's room for one person. And what's very good about this, or the pros of a monoplace chamber, is it can be pressurized at a speed that the person inside the chamber has the capacity to equalize their ears, because not everyone's eustachian tubes are equal. Some have tighter eustachian tubes and more challenging aspects with equalization. So it can be, the mono chamber can be pressurized at a speed that's comfortable to the patient. And then also the pressure that the treatment's done at is very unique to that person and their individual medical history and other considerations. Now, then there's the next chamber is a multi-place chamber, and this is basically like a pressurized room where you can fit anywhere from 2 to 48 people inside a chamber. And these are generally found in hospitals. And the advantage of these is that you can fit many people inside a chamber at one time, so you can do a large quantity. But the drawback to that means everyone has to receive treatment at the same pressure, so it's not unique. And also, if there's say 48 people inside a chamber, the speed of pressurization is determined by the person with the most poor equalization inside the eustachian tube. So sometimes it can take a long time to get to pressure. Now, the bottom one, a lot of people will be familiar with these. These are the mild chambers that are flooding the market. And these are very cheap and they can be used at home. They're basically a zip-up bag, or a lot of these are in gyms or wellness centers and things like that. And now, the vast majority, or almost all the research done on hyperbaric oxygen is done on the top two, which are classified as hard shell chambers. Now, the soft shell ones at the bottom also utilize a oxygen concentrator, which means it's not verified 100% medical grade oxygen. So there's also a bit of a debate on the percentage of oxygen that people are receiving whilst getting treatment in those chambers. Now, how does hyperbaric work? Hyperbaric is the marrying of, I guess, a few components. There's a pressure component from the chamber, and then there's the gas, which is 100% oxygen. So the two of these combine is what creates the physiological experience of hyperbaric. And hyperbaric utilizes physics laws such as Boyle's law and Henry's law in order to have its physiological effect. So Boyle's law is basically that the gas is inversely proportional to the pressure, and the gas in hyperbaric is obviously oxygen, which basically means that under pressure, oxygen, the molecular size of oxygen is reduced, which means you can fit more oxygen in a smaller amount of area. Henry's law is the soda water law, which is basically where an increase in pressure means that the gas will dissolve in the liquid. So in the case of hyperbaric, we're talking about the plasma, which is the fluid around the red blood cells. So hyperbaric, the beauty of hyperbaric is that the oxygen will dissolve into the plasma, and this can lead to 1,000 to 1,500% increased oxygen at a cell level through this mechanism. I mean, there's a very interesting study that I've put that third point there, which is in 1959, they actually did an experiment where they took out all the red blood cells out of some pigs, and they basically could keep the pigs alive indefinitely under hyperbaric conditions because of these mechanisms of these two laws that I just went through then. So it's a very interesting study. I'm not sure whether it'd be done these days, but apparently the pigs lived a very happy life after the experiment. So as I was saying, there's a few variables of hyperbaric that can be manipulated to create a treatment dosage. And these are pressure, oxygen, and the time. So the pressure we describe in hyperbaric as atmospheres absolute, or ATA. And generally, pressures for treatment are anywhere from 1.3 ATA up until 3 ATA. So 2 ATA is the equivalent pressure exerted on the body from 10 meters underwater diving. 3 ATA is about 20 meters. So that gives you a bit of an understanding of how deep you're going with the pressure. But basically, the pressure can be manipulated, and there's a large amount of research that the differing pressures will have different effects on the body, which we may go into later on. And then oxygen is the gas that the person is breathing inside a chamber. Most of the time, it is 100%. In other, like I was talking about with the oxygen concentrator, sometimes there will be a nitrogen components because it won't be 100%. And then the time. So generally, time inside the chamber is most of the time is 60 to 90 minutes, but it could be anywhere up to 2 hours at one time. Generally, sessions are done 5 days a week consecutively, and the protocols range for anywhere from around 5 sessions up until 60 sessions, and that's doing continuous sessions every day until the end of the protocol, depending on what one's using it for. So the benefits of hyperbaric, there's a few different mechanisms that it exerts a physiological effect. The first one is the mechanical, which is similar to what I was explaining about with the increase of 1,000 to 1,500% oxygen to a cell level, means that the cells receive a large amount of oxygen called hyperoxia. And this can overcome, sometimes there's places in the body that have a hypoxic because of a blockage or a restriction for whatever reason, and it means hyperbaric can overcome that and reoxygenate a tissue. As well as the increase in oxygen can lead to an increase in energy production inside the cell, particularly the mitochondria. Then there's a cell signaling effect on the body, and this can be divided into hyperoxic and hypoxic effects of cell signaling. So hyperoxic is when there's large amounts of oxygen, and this leads to reactive oxygen species that can be a catalyst for many physiological effects. But very interestingly, in recent research, there's more attention to the hypoxic or the relative hypoxic effect of hyperbaric. And this has been very interesting because it stimulates hypoxia-inducible factor, or HIF, or HIF-1 alpha. And HIF-1 alpha has been actually, it was the discovery of HIF-1 alpha. I think in 2019, the person that discovered HIF-1 alpha actually received a Nobel Prize because of the discovery. And then recently, there's researchers out of Israel who have had a lot of interest in hypoxia-inducible factor and ways to manipulate that through hyperbaric. So one way to manipulate it is you go inside the chamber and you're receiving 1,000 to 1,500% increase in oxygen at a cell level. And then you come out of the chamber and maybe the 23 hours left over for the rest of the day, you're in a relative hypoxia relative to being inside the chamber. And then more interestingly and more recent, the Israeli researchers have been looking into creating a relative hypoxia during a session. So though a person inside the chamber will be breathing 100% oxygen at a certain pressure, and every 20 minutes they take off the mask and breathe 21% air. And although it'll be a heightened oxygen delivery with the pressure, it still is way under compared to when they're breathing the 100%. So that creates a relative hypoxia and stimulates this HIF-1 alpha. And the graph on the right-hand side shows over the course of 60 sessions, hyperbaric oxygen sessions, of this continuous stimulation of HIF-1 alpha from relative hypoxia, that it steadily climbs to a max amount after the 60th session. So the HIF-1 alpha in particular is a response to the body thinking that it's losing oxygen, whereas obviously in this case it's not, it's just returning back to baseline. So as a result, it'll stimulate many effects in the body, such as gene stimulation and vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, which stimulates the growth of new capillaries and blood vessels throughout the body. It'll also stimulate stem cells by up to 800% in circulating stem cells. And the general cell signaling of hyperbaric can have an anti-inflammatory effect and modulate cytokines, which are inflammatory mediating chemicals. And hyperbaric will also stimulate the release of endogenous, so inside the body, antioxidants, which can help with buffering lifestyle of oxidative stress, such as smoking is a obvious one, but and also hyperbaric will stimulate collagen production. There's a lot of research on wound healing and repair, and as well as hyperbaric will in this case scenario is of particular interest of stimulating neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. So with PTSD specifically, and the research to date on hyperbaric oxygen utilized for PTSD, this is a chart of a lot of the research. There's a couple of other trials I'll talk about in a second. But the first trial, interestingly enough, was done by a very famous hyperbaric physician in America, Dr. Paul Harsh, and he was actually treating a veteran with a traumatic brain injury. He also, during the course of the treatment, he noticed that the PTSD symptoms improved, although that's not what he was treating for at the time. And this led to further studies and trials being conducted moving forward. And at the top of this chart here was a trial that was seen as the gold standard, which was done by the Israelis in 2022, as published. And this is done, they do a lot of their research at 2 atmospheres, 90-minute sessions, and for 60 sessions. And in this study, they showed that there was significant improvements in PTSD symptoms, as well as this being shown as functional or changes on functional MRI, backing up the psychological changes of PTSD. So then they actually followed this study up in 2023 with a 2-year longitudinal follow-up, and they saw that the patients that had received treatment in that 2022 trial had actually not only maintained their PTSD symptoms, but a lot of them, it had actually improved 2 years after the conclusion of the final 60th session of hyperbaric. They also saw 2 years after that there was a reduction of medications, and as well as an increased social activity and socialization of the veterans in that study. Then in 2024 was the first systematic review and of all the studies that have been done to date by Dr. Paul Harsh, and he attempted the first dosage analysis to try and find what the optimum dose of hyperbaric for the treatment of PTSD. And then last year, the last one on the bottom of the screen is now what's seen as the gold standard of hyperbaric for PTSD in veterans study. Because one critique of the research up until this point is it's very hard to have a sham control or a placebo in hyperbaric, because it's been shown even a treatment of 1.3 or 1.2 and breathing air alone, they still will receive positive effects from hyperbaric. And so that had murkied up a bit of the data. So this study in 2025, what they did was they had a sham controlled group where they pressurized the chamber to 1.2, and then they depressurized it back to 1.01. So very small detectable change of pressure. But through this, the the participants in the study were interviewed after, and they believed they were getting a hyperbaric treatment. So this is the first really sham-controlled trial, and again it showed very positive results. And this is, like I said, is the gold standard for PTSD treatment at this stage. So I won't get into too much detail, but these studies did show improvements on a lot of symptomology with PTSD, and this was backed up through the imaging, through functional MRI, or in some of the research were done with SPECT scans as well. And of particular interest was the hippocampus, the frontolimbic circulatory, and the amygdala. So these two graphs were taken out of the systematic review, and this is just basically showing the spectrum of pressures that were utilized during these trials that were included in the systematic review. And this shows that we're still not at the stage where we can conclusively say this is the pressure, this is the protocol, and this is the amount of treatment to elicit a positive response. And so there has been debate over this optimum pressure. So to simplify, the Israelis have been doing treatments for 60 sessions at 2 atmospheres, 90-minute sessions. And this is the protocol they've been doing with a lot of their studies. Whereas in the US, a lot of these studies have been conducted at 1.5 atmospheres of pressure and 40 sessions. So there's a lot of debate of which one actually is the optimum dosage or the minimal effective dosage to create the maximum effect. So this leads me to my research, and a lot of these questions that I've been raising, I will try to answer with my research. So my research I will be conducting hopefully later on in this year, around mid-year, around June, July. And what's unique about this research is it'll be the first hyperbaric oxygen therapy study for PTSD for ex-serving members of the ADF. So this will be the first in Australia. And it also will be the first worldwide study comparing these two pressures. I mean, even in many other conditions that hyperbaric's used for, one of my colleagues has done a comparison from 1.3 to 2 atmospheres, but comparing the 1.5 to 2 atmospheres hasn't been done yet. So it's going to be particularly exciting to have the data between these two pressures. So what's involved is I will be conducting 60 hyperbaric sessions for both groups, and this will be done for 90 minutes in a session, and this will be done 5 days a week for the conclusion of the 60th session, which is 12 weeks, and this will be done on the Gold Coast up here. So as objective measures, we'll be doing functional MRIs as a baseline, so before the first, and then it'll be done after the 30th session, and then again after the 60th session. And participants will also fill out psychological questionnaires, again as a baseline, after 30, after 60, and then also 3 months after the conclusion of the 60 as a follow-up. So as I said before, it'll be conducted on the Gold Coast up here, the MRIs and the hyperbaric treatments. There'll be no cost to the participants. And I attained ethical approval through Bond University and DVA last year, which was a great achievement. So this is a flow chart on the left, and this is outlining what I was explaining just before, and I'll go through it again, just so we can see it in chronological order. And this is also going to include the recruitment, if anyone's interested. So the initial recruitment, if anyone's interested, I'll provide a barcode which people can scan, which will take you to a survey, which will show an expression of interest. And this will then and we'll also outline in this webinar the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And then we will look into the participant eligibility through some more screening. And then the ultimate will come down to the research team. We'll go through and assess each case by case. And we're ultimately looking to recruit 24 to 30 participants for the study. At that point, we'll get the participants send them a full documentation of the participant information sheet, which will outline all the potential risks or not risks and the ins and outs of what will happen through the trial. and also consent form will be in there as well. And then from there, they'll fill out their first such psychological questionnaires and then move to the baseline of the functional MRI. There'll then be a blinding randomization into the two groups, the 1.5 atmospheres and then the 2 atmospheres group, and they will receive 30 sessions before then getting another functional MRI and the psychological questionnaires, and then receive another 30 hyperbaric sessions, and then repeating again the MRI, psychological questionnaires. And then, like I said, the final psychological questionnaires will be filled out 3 months after the conclusion of the 60th session. We'll then analyze the data and go from there. So the participant requirements, I guess in summary, they'll need to complete the psychological questionnaires 4 times, which may take up to 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. The functional MRIs may take 30 minutes again. That'll be done 3 times. The 60, 90-minute sessions, which is 5 days a week for the 12 weeks until the conclusion of the 60th session. And like any clinical trial, anyone can withdraw at any one time. So we'll go through the inclusion criteria. So the inclusion criteria is any ex-serving member of the ADF that have been diagnosed with PTSD by the participant's healthcare practitioner using the CAPS, which is the clinical administered PTSD scale. And they'll need to be between the ages of 25 to 60 and of all genders. And they'll also not be able to be engaged in any other therapy during the course of PTSD, during the course of the hyperbaric oxygen therapy through the 60 sessions. So the exclusion criteria is anyone that's still in active service in the ADF, any unstable medical conditions such as a serious brain injury, a serious heart condition, pneumothorax, which is a collapsed lung, any neurological disorders, cancer, seizures, whether they're currently pregnant or lactating, or whether they're planning on being pregnant during the course of the study, any substance abuses, which are current, and any previous hyperbaric treatment in the last year. As I was explaining before, because of the pressurization, everyone will need to have eustachian tubes that are efficient in equalization. So anything that's incompatible with equalization and pressure changes, such as sinusitis or sinusitis, severe sinusitis, pharyngitis, or otitis media. So no planned surgical procedures during the time of the surgery. And no severe cognitive impairments, intellectual disability, or mental illness beyond PTSD. Obviously, there's a lot of symptomology that comes under the umbrella of PTSD, and obviously we'll be looking at everyone as a case-to-case analysis and to look into their eligibility and also whether they're known to myself before the study. So yeah, as I said, each participant will be assessed by the research team as case by case, and we're aiming to start in June, July of this year. So how to get involved? If you are involved, and I think it's on ProPatria website as well, the barcode, you can scan the barcode. That'll take you to a form to fill out to express interest, and we'll get back to you. Or you can email me directly at this email as well. So recapping that there's no cost to the participants, and not that I'm just putting this in there to give an understanding of the cost that's involved with the trial, which is a bit under $20,000 Australian dollars per participant. So we're looking to get private funding, and again, putting it out there. If anyone's interested in becoming a funding partner, I'd love to talk to you, or if anyone knows anyone that's interested to get involved as well. So although my study is very much from an academic reductionistic, we're looking at to how hyperbaric specifically affects PTSD symptomology, but in reality, and particularly coming back to the Royal Commission, is Hyperbaric is part of an integrative approach to PTSD, and with all the other great modalities that are emerging at the moment. And I think that is the future of treatments in Australia. But firstly, we need to do the studies, and this is ultimately what I'm trying to achieve with this research, is the first door opening to research of hyperbaric oxygen in the veteran space, and particularly with mental health. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and hearing about it.